The chair lays out House Bill 309 and recognizes its author, Representative Moody, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. House Bill 309 is probably going to be one of the few times this session you hear me ask to create a newer or stronger penalty. But being smart on crime and right-sizing penalties sometimes means addressing gaps in the law. Let me give you the real-world situation as it deals with HB 309, and you tell me whether we have a law that is adequate. A 17-year-old girl is walking down the street when suddenly a man comes out of nowhere and gropes her breasts and genitals. I don't mean accidentally brushes or jostles. I mean aggressively sexually touches her for his perverted pleasure. Thankfully, a police officer comes around the corner right afterwards, and she flags the cop down for help. She probably wants the offender arrested. Can't do it, the officer says. She probably wants the offender meaningfully prosecuted. Can't do that either, the officer says. Well, what can you do? The officer flips out his ticket book, hands what amounts to a traffic ticket, and sends them on their way. That's because what I just described is only a Class C misdemeanor in Texas. Of course, that's only if it happens to an adult. If the offender did that to a 16-year-old, it would be a second-degree felony with mandatory sex offender registration. If that's not a gap in the law, then I don't know what is. My bill addresses that by making it a Class A misdemeanor for a person to grope someone, touch them with the person's intimate parts, expose another person's intimate parts, or put them in contact with bodily fluids like semen. Now, all that has to be done without the victim's consent and with the intent to arouse or gratify sexually. So we're not talking about innocent or accidental conduct. Those are the standards that have been used in other sex crime laws in Texas for decades. So they're well understood in our courts. In the same way that our courts routinely distinguish between something like public urination and indecent exposure, they'll do that here as well. This isn't a bill that will lead to overcriminalization or unintended consequences. There's also no sex offender registration or anything like that in this bill. The only changes the bill makes besides creating the offense itself is adding it to our protective order laws, which is what every page besides the first page of the bill is about. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that I reserve the right to close.
I just have one question that I wanted to ask you. Would this bill require skin-to-skin contact, or is it, earlier you talked about brushing up against somebody?
No, I mean, so you are talking about, if you go to the contents of the bill, right?
Yes.
Touches the anus, breast, or any part of the genitals of another person, touches another person with the anus, breast, or any other part of the genitals of another person, exposes or attempts to expose, so that's trying to pull down clothing, right? And then you have the fluid part of the statute. So it doesn't necessarily require that, but you are talking about more aggressive. So over the top of the clothes, aggressive groping would still count here. And so the reason is you don't get to felony level offense now, aside from the child victim. You don't get to felony level as an adult unless there is sexual penetration. And so we have a large category of conduct that you and I would both say that is that is not some prank or innocent touching. This is someone that's aggressively doing this, and to treat that like a Class C is certainly not the right way to do that.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask because I don't think I had a resource witness left tonight.
Okay. Yeah, it has been a long night, so I appreciate your patience.
No. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Vice Chair Zettler.
Now let me ask you this though: what happens if you have a couple, they're on a date or something like that, and he makes moves that she doesn't appreciate, but at that point it stops, but he's already touched her breast or something like that, and so
the issue then would turn on consent.
Okay,
whether that was consensual or not.
Okay, but if he stopped at that point, would it still be a crime?
Potentially, depends on whether she consented to. So you can be in a consensual encounter with someone, you're talking or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
And if someone indicates at any point, I'd like to exit
Right.
that this is now not okay, the conduct has to be without consent. So I could certainly see a situation flowing from consensual to non-consensual. Now, that's going to turn on the facts of any particular case. So I think that's probably, that'll probably be the more complicated scenario, but much like any other statute that deals with sexual offenses, the most complicated ones to work through are the ones that there was a consensual piece to the puzzle. I can talk about my own experience as a prosecutor. Some of the most difficult cases are where you had an adult consensual relationship that turned non-consensual at some point. It's very difficult because of the way our sexual assault statutes are drafted to really work your way through those. So I assume that would find its way here, but then the question would turn on consent rather than the conduct. So,
Right, thank you.
All right, members, any other questions? Thank you. We'll call you back up to close. Chair calls Joshua McBride.
Hi, Madam Chair. Representatives,
Good evening.
how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
My name is Joshua McBride. I'm representing myself in favor for House Bill 309.
All right.
I live in Austin, Texas, and on December 15th, 2016, I was sexually assaulted in an offensive or sexual manner, as the law puts it right now, by my dentist that I had known for 7 days. Let me catch everyone up to speed on what he knew. You will know the exact same thing. I had had 2 major brain surgeries because of a aneurysm that was on my left mid-cortex artery. The second was to repair my skull. The third was to replace my skull. I had taken 26,500 pills within 28 months and 3 weeks, which is an average of 27 per day. My neurologist, after doing scans along with another dentist up in Georgetown, determined that the teeth that started to snap would basically just continue throughout the rest of my mouth because of the fact they didn't know what was causing my seizures and things like that until they found the aneurysm, which I don't fault them for. It was hard to find. So you now know everything that he knew that day. But the only thing that you have, I guess, that he doesn't, is 7 days less of not having it on paper and not having this in his head that I was disabled. And maybe to him more susceptible to this. So, when molds were being done for my dentures, he came into the room and he asked, Joshua, how many pounds have you lost since your teeth have been pulled? And I had said about 20 to 30 pounds, and he said nothing. As he put his hand on my abdomen and put it underneath my underwear and grabbed my penis. This probably lasted for about 4 seconds. It's 4 seconds that I think lasted longer than 39 years of standing here because I didn't react. I reported it to facility management. They said, don't worry, we moved him to Dallas. It's been taken care of. I reported it to APD. Their hands were tied. Why? The law is written the way the law is written. They could take my statement, they could take his statement, then based on what they concur, basically, they could issue him a citation for $200, $400 to $500. Texas State Board of Dental Examiners, insufficient evidence, case closed. County prosecutor, insufficient evidence, case closed. City Municipal Court, prosecutor, insufficient evidence, case closed. Why? He said, she said, he said, she said. Whichever way you want to put it, that's the way it is. That's how it goes. No DNA, insufficient evidence. After reading the law in its entirety, it almost felt like a second attack in a way, because I didn't know I was so underprotected. I didn't feel that way just because I was a guy or because I was a patient or anything, just as a person. I didn't think that anyone should be able to do that to anybody, regardless of their sex. So I'm asking you to do what is right and what is fair, that we not allow others to do anything like this to another person without their consent. And believe me, there's a definite difference between unappreciated and unconsenting. This is neither. Please pass this bill. And many victims that did not have the courage to come forward will be thanking you.
Well, Mr. McBride, we appreciate your courage to come and testify today and tell us your story. That means a lot to us. Are there any questions? Are there any questions for Mr. McBride? Thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Chair calls Katherine Strandberg.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for having me this evening, Chair and Committee. My name is Katherine Strandberg. I'm the Criminal Justice Analyst for the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, and I'm here to testify strongly in favor of Representative Moody's House Bill 309. So we are the unifying voice to eliminate sexual violence in Texas. We're the statewide coalition of rape crisis centers, advocates, and survivors. And we are committed to fostering a culture that respects the fundamental rights and dignity of all Texans. So we're a membership-led coalition, which means every biennium, the rape crisis centers and advocates who are our membership get to decide what our legislative goals are for the session. And this bill represents one of the core objectives that our membership has selected for us. So as the representative and our witnesses will testify, this bill makes forced sexual touching, including grabbing a person's genitals or ejaculating on them, punishable as a Class A misdemeanor instead of the Class C ticket-only offense it currently is. And it also makes victims eligible for protective orders. So I do want to start by describing some of the offenses that we're talking about. Forced sexual touching includes an old family friend touching a 17-year-old inappropriately, pressuring her to take off her clothes, a massage therapist or other health professional forcing their hands inside a patient's clothes. And it would include someone who rubs up against and ejaculates on a fellow rider on public transit. So not only is this a serious offense, but it tends to be pretty common. 1 in 2 women and 1 in 6 men have been sexually touched in an unwelcome way, and 32% of women nationwide report being sexually touched, including attempted rape, in public. As it stands, these common and violent offenses are Class C misdemeanors or ticket-only offenses, and that means that sexual assault against an adult that does not involve penetration does not include jail time, even for repeat offenders. And I would like to note that it's important to see, or remember rather, sorry, it's been a long day, that the same conduct committed against a victim of 16 years or younger is a second-degree felony. It's indecency with a child. Texas is also one of only 6 states that does not reflect the seriousness of this crime in our current penal code. So the low-level categorization of the crime, as other witnesses have testified and will continue to testify tonight, survivors commonly experience depression, anxiety, PTSD, and self-harming behavior as a result of being victimized by these crimes. But in addition to that, it also limits the investment that law enforcement can have into these investigations. Police officers don't possess the incentive to properly investigate crimes that only result in a low-level ticket offense. So this bill corrects a huge gap that we have in Texas law that we don't have in other states. We ask the committee to move to classify these assaults as Class A misdemeanors and allow victims to seek protective orders against their assailants. I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Any questions? Appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Chair calls Tiffany Russell.
Hello, I'm Tiffany Russell, and I'm here in favor of the bill. On June 28th of 2016, I was sitting in the sex crimes unit, providing a statement about the man who slapped my genitals while I was jogging past him on the sidewalk. I was choosing my assailant's picture out of a photo lineup and talking with the detective about the process of taking the assailant to court and the time spent on the prosecution of the crime, and that it would ultimately equate to a traffic ticket or a $500 fine, and that's only if he was convicted. It was in that moment and the first time in my adult life that I truly felt unprotected by the law, and I realized that I lived in a state with archaic laws that protect an assailant and ultimately keep the hands tied of the government representatives who were put in place to protect us. I had to be the one to protect myself, and therefore I made the humiliating decision to not prosecute. When sexual misconduct for sexual gratification is handled as a Class C misdemeanor, it puts the victims in jeopardy of their personal information going public, then opens probable retaliation from that assailant's sphere, and trolls who could possibly post inflammatory information that would indefinitely impact the victim. I'm here today to represent all victims who are too scared or intimidated to come forward because of these negligent laws, the minimization of the offense, or retaliation that ultimately ensues. You're here today as our elected representatives who are put into place to protect all people, not just the aggressor who continues to openly violate others with little penalty. I look to you to make the changes needed to protect anyone who is touched without their consent, and I trust that you will do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions for Ms. Russell? Thank you so much. Chair calls Tatum Zico. Oh, okay. Chair calls Kelly Phillips.
Hi, y'all. I'm Kelly Phillips. I'm here representing myself, and I am speaking in favor of House Bill 309. Thank you so much for your patience. We've been here all day, so I can't imagine how y'all feel. I'm glad that I'm having the opportunity to testify because I think I represent something that Vice Chair Zedler brought up earlier. I went to a hair salon for the first time about a year ago, and the gentleman was quite older. I found out later he's in his 80s. He's still cutting hair, but I say that because when he started cutting my hair, he pressed his groin into my side. My first thought was, oh my gosh, this guy's so old, he can't even stand up straight without having to lean on me or something. And then he kind of, the more he leaned into me, he was wearing thin slacks, and I absolutely felt his genitals. And, my first thought, I froze, and I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of a big girl, so I started thinking, well, maybe you're just too big. And I know it's stupid that that's kind of where my mind went, but I was trying to be polite, so I was trying to reposition myself so where he wouldn't have to touch me. He went to the other side and he did it again. And then he went to the other side and he did it again. And then he did it again. And then I was completely frozen, just panic attack inside. And then he went to cut the front of my hair, and as he did, he let his hand rest on my breast. Right there on top of my clothes, so not skin to skin. And then after he would make each cut, he would slowly just swipe his hand across my nipple. And he did that with both sides multiple times. I felt disgusted and horrified, mortified, everything. And when I got out to my car, I was kind of going through the emotions of getting kind of pissed about it, pardon my French, and I Googled him, and I found out he's a convicted sex offender. So he has a history. He's in the registry for indecent contact with a child, 14-year-old girl. I was so mad, and so I looked him up in the TDLR, and his license is active. So I reported him through there and got a reply that it's not a violation. He had a sign in his window that said, "We welcome children," by the way. And so I reported it to Austin Police Department, and they referred me to sex crimes, and sex crimes took the case but warned me from the very beginning that the extent of what they could do if the municipal court chose to prosecute would be assault by contact or something along those lines, Class C. I kind of went back and forth on whether or not to do it. I finally decided, you know what, screw it, I need to do it. And so I wrote up the entire story. I had to fill out the paperwork myself. I had to go to municipal court. I had to go file it with the clerk myself with tears running down my face because it was only a Class C misdemeanor. If it had been a Class A, I could have had a little bit more support from the judicial process, to do that on my behalf. So I was pretty enraged because I'm a huge fan of the law enforcement community. My brother is a law enforcement officer, and I feel like it let me down. So I'm really, really, really grateful that we're addressing this and at least bringing it to you guys. So I really, really hope that it gets voted. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your story. Just horrifying. Members, are there any questions? Thank you. Do we have a resource witness? Shannon Edmonds? All right. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members. My name is Shannon Edmonds with the Texas District and County Attorneys Association here as a resource on the bill.
I just want to make sure that I clarify, because one thing I want to make sure that we can address is this skin to skin, that this bill, I want to make sure if this bill does not just singly, is not limited to single, skin to skin, I want to make sure that everybody understands that. Does it need to be written in that way? Is there common law that says otherwise?
Yeah, the way it's written now would be interpreted to require under the clothing touching, I believe, because we have an indecency with a child statute that makes an exception to that general rule and says for the indecency with a child by contact, it says it includes over the clothing touching. That's not in this bill. So depending on whether you want it to be or not, if you want it to be over the clothing, you would probably want to specify it the way that it is written in the indecency with a child by contact statute. But I also know that in the past may have engendered some concerns about it being overbroad. So that'll be up to you who get to make the policies, whether or not you think it should include that kind of contact or not. There are several other ways that this statute is also more narrow than the current offense we have for children, but it would still cover these examples that you're hearing.
Well, the bill author has indicated that he would like for it to have over the clothing, so I want to make sure that we address that.
And you could just cut and paste the language from the indecency with a child by contact statute and put it into this if that was the intent.
Okay.
And that would make it crystal clear to everybody what it does and does not address.
Okay. Are there any questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 309? Chair recognizes Representative Moody to close.
Thank you all thank you, Madam Chair, for hearing this bill. And I certainly appreciate you hearing this testimony that you've heard. Similar story I heard back home in El Paso, which is why we drafted this bill in the first place. And that situation was so offensive to the young woman that happened to, and she thought the officer, when the officer gave her the same information, can't do anything, Class C, can't arrest, can't whatever, she actually filed an IA action because she said that this can't be the case. This person must be lying to me. This officer is not doing his job, and she came to find that the officer was telling her the truth. The problem was the law was wrong. Law is bad. I appreciate you digging in a little bit further into the other topic on over the close, because this bill last session seemed to be in pretty good shape, and the conversation was abruptly halted because people wanted to talk about bathrooms instead. And so anything that had to do with sexual assault or offensive touching got stopped. So last session, when we were focusing on bathroom bills like this, situations like you just heard, those real world situations, those are the folks that didn't get a result because we were dealing with garbage. And so I hope I know that that's out of the way this session, so hopefully we can get a result for the people that this happens to, because that's really what we're here to do. And I will rectify that in the code. I know that there was broader language that we started with, and we were working through it, but I will keep you apprised of those conversations.
Okay, thank you so much. Members, are there any questions? All right. If there are no objections, House Bill 309 will be left pending.